So what is next for the Anaheim Ducks? Hello everyone, I'm Tanya Lyon alongside Ducks beat writers Eric Stevens and Jeff Miller. So let's get right into this, Eric. I mean, they've already made their coaching change. What is next? I believe Bob Murray said that he was going to look into blowing the team up, so to speak, if the coaching change didn't have the effect they wanted. Could you argue that the coaching change hasn't had the effect they wanted?
Well, clearly so far it hasn't. I think they're 3-8-2 under Bruce Boudreau. They had hoped that he would bring in some new energy whatsoever, which I think he has, but clearly the play on the ice hasn't turned around. So I think Bob Murray is going to have to really think long and hard about whether he can win with the current core that he has. And we're talking about players like Ryan Getzlaf, Bobby Ryan, Jonas Hiller, Cam Fowler, Corey Perry. He's got to decide whether he can build around that and win with that group going forward, or either break off one of those major pieces and whatsoever and see what he can get in order to retool or reshape or whatever you want to call it, rebuild the roster so that they don't have another season like this one.
A player making big headlines throughout the continent and perhaps other continents as well is Selanne. He's at a point-a-game pace, and there's a lot of buzz about whether or not he could actually get moved at the trade deadline. Jeff, you spoke with him today. What are your thoughts on that? Could he get moved, and would he even want to be moved?
I think Teemu is hoping against all hope right now that this somehow turns around. I don't think he wants to go anywhere. He loves it here. We all know that. His family loves it here. But I think if it doesn't turn around, I think he absolutely would go somewhere else if it's the right situation. I think just talking to him today, he certainly doesn't want to talk about it right now. But he also basically said, "I'm never going to say never." So I think whenever an athlete says that, the door is certainly open. And I think under the right circumstances, for one last rush into the playoffs, I think he would certainly consider it. Yes.
And he wants to win. Let's make no mistake here. He wants to win, and he does want another chance at a Stanley Cup. And it's clearly it's not going to happen this year. If the situation persists where they're at the bottom of the league another 5-6 weeks from now or whatsoever, I think he'll think long and hard about it. The Ducks certainly don't want to trade him. They don't want to lose him. He doesn't want to go anywhere, like Jeff said. But at the same time, he'll have to think long and hard about, whether to go to management and say, look, I'd like to go to a contender. Could you see what, you can do? And then the Ducks will act accordingly then. But it's going to have to be driven by Teemu as far as, what he wants in what could be his final NHL season.
There's all this talk of blowing up the entire core, but at what point does Bob Murray get held responsible? I mean, there is the argument being made that he hasn't made a good trade in a year and a half. He hasn't really been visible to the media when Randy Carlyle came under fire. At what point does he get held accountable? I mean, do you think that a GM change could be in the works despite the fact that he is signed to a 4-year contract? I'll start with Jeff.
The contract situation certainly muddies it, but I think you have to look at where this team is right now and how drastically it's underachieved from how they finished last year, and he's certainly accountable, and I think he knows he's accountable, and I'm sure he's not comfortable with the way things are, and I'm sure he feels pressure, whether it's coming from above or whether it's self-inflicted. He has to feel the pressure, and I think even with the contract, we just saw they signed Randy Carlyle to an extension, and we saw how long that lasted. So I think he certainly should feel the pressure, and I'm sure he does.
All right, I'm going to add a twist to this question then. So give us your thoughts on that. If he could be held accountable and lose his job, possibly this summer, and going forward, would you trust him if you did have to rebuild the team? Would you trust him, going forward?
No, that's a good question, Tanya. I know the Samuelis, they certainly like the fact that Bob was able to dig the team out of sort of the salary cap mess that it was in the final days under Brian Burke. But at the same time, he's been on a real dry spell as far as trades, as far as impact signings whatsoever. And I think management is going to, really have to decide, are they comfortable with Bob being the guy that will rebuild this team? And I think there are some real questions as to whether he has. Now, granted, there is some young talent coming through the pipeline. They've drafted fairly well. It's still going to take a couple of years. Guys like Emerson Edom are on their way up. Obviously, Cam Fowler, we know what he's done these 2 years. So they're going to have to, at some point, deal with the fact that this is going to be a transition for them. And whether you call it rebuild or whether you come out and tell the fans that it is going to be a rebuilding situation, and whether Bob is the right guy to be able to be at the front of that process, because from the way it looks, it's going to be a process. And unless management looks at it as this is a one-off year and it's just a terrible year and it's just one of those things that happens whatsoever. But I've got to think, we see the holes on this roster. We see, we see the deficiencies that they have compared to other teams and whatsoever. They've got to make that hard decision as far as whether Bob's the right guy to, make the right ones going forward.